The Polyverse presents Modern Mancy. The pursuit of knowledge was central to Alexi's life. For as long as he could remember, he would go to any lengths to attain even more. Until recently, however, he had been bound by his duties as a spell sword for the Central Empire's self-defense force. Military service was compulsory for his homeland, and he was not about to burn any bridges by refusing service. He would not burn any bridges unless he had to, after all. No Centralian would. So, he had bided his time while he waited for his tenure to end, and now, after more than 5 years of service, his power had grown, but his hunger for knowledge would not be sated. Out on his own now, he had studied all he could in the libraries of his homeland, and he had to move beyond Centralian borders. That was well outside his comfort zone. Alexi was slightly taller than average, his frame a bit more lanky than muscular. His hazel eyes complemented his sandy brown, sweat-drenched brow. Despite no longer being a member of the SDF, he had retained some of the garments composed of advanced textiles and the medium-line tech. After all, top-of-the-line tech was reserved for active-duty military services. The forest was endless. The path he was on barely qualified to be called a path. It had been tough going, especially for one used to the wide avenues and uniformly flat paving of streets back home. The miles of travel in the wilds were beginning to take their toll on his feet. Despite wearing the most comfortable and broken-in shoes he had, his feet were aching something fierce. After all, he hadn't been through this kind of punishment for quite some time. In fact, not since his time as a lieutenant on Border Patrol 4 years ago. Sighing, he checked his watch. He hadn't made the time he was hoping for, but now he had all the time in the world, and it was time to set up camp for the night. He found himself a small clearing atop a small hill, a perfect overnight spot for a bivouac. He dropped his black overland pack and his practiced hands unpacked his tent and utilities. Slowly, he began to assemble his temporary lodging. Pride life was about being as great as one could be, so that one could give the pride all the support it needed. This was in every aspect of life, and one could add to the whole with cooking, research, work, but until fully adult, there was only so much you could do. One could not, for example, join in on the hunts or the defense of the Pride Vale until adulthood. To that end, Kana's first change, the entrance into adulthood, was fast approaching. Any night now, her body would be contorted and changed into the form of her inner beast. At once frightening and exciting, this grand occasion was not being helped by the fact that her younger friends had already had their first transition. It was so frustrating, especially for one that had been the de facto leader and the strongest of her peers. For the 4th night in a row, she would be spending the night outside the Pride Vale in the sacred glen of her pride. Her sisters of blood would stand guard over her first change, as the first change left one most vulnerable. She sat atop a blanket-covered hay pile, wrapped in her favorite quilt and little else. Why can't we do this at home, like you do? She groaned at her mother, trying to get comfortable. They were quite a pair. Kana was almost twice as tall as the rest of her pride. She towered over her mother, though they did share long orange-red hair and pointy ears and almost feline features. Her mother had piercing blue eyes, and she had deep green eyes. Night slowly coated the glen in black velour as nightly insects called into the nocturne.
Oh, my sweet little one,
Felicia stroked her daughter's hair soothingly.
The first change, well, the first several really, are excessively violent. This is not only about your safety, but the safety of others. Trust me, little one, it's for the best.
The night crept along and fog rolled in as frustration built up.
I'm older than Sonia and Sasha and the others. Why am I last? Sweetie, the stronger the Transfigurer, the older they are on their first night. So why can't it just happen now and get it over with? You may be retarding the process by thinking too hard, Felicia soothed. How about you close your eyes and listen to me? Picture a forest full of fog. Beside you, a babbling brook.
Kana did as told, and let her mother lead her through the calming meditation, even though she didn't think it would work. Slowly, though, the calm overtook her. Then, suddenly, pain ripped across her whole body. As she growled in pain, she tried to open her eyes, but red coated her vision as pain continued to ripple across and distort her form. Quicker than she thought possible, the pain eased up as she got used to it. It wasn't comfortable, but things instantly got worse than before. Bones disjointed, her skin threatened to rip itself off, and finally, the pain knocked her out. As he put the finishing touches on his campsite, the sounds of a struggle, though somewhat muted, cascaded through the forest. The sound, while distinctly not animals, was animalistic, and Alexi was not aware of the political climate of the area. It was never a good idea to get involved in a dispute between two unknown parties, but so too was it ill-advised to ignore potential threats. He knew he would have to get some knowledge of his surroundings before he turned in, so he gathered some equipment to scout around. As he was alone, he would need to secure his site before proceeding. To ensure his bivouac was left undisturbed in his absence, he would have to leave behind a glamour. A glamour was a simple camouflage technique that could hide almost anything from prying eyes. Like any other charm, something you make, or curse, something you do to a living thing, or spell, something you cast about, a glamour needed a power source and a means of controlling it. Both could come from the caster, or some other suitably prepared device. In this case, the technological prowess of the Central Empire provided both. It was a simple device of matte black gunmetal with a few spherical gems mounted on it. He turned the device on and checked his power level. It had enough power to last a few hours, so he set it down on his mini table. After setting up the distortion level and the radius, he started off towards the source of the disturbance. After exiting the affected area, he turned back to check how the charm was holding up. As he knew what he was looking at and that he had set it up, he could see the outlines of his camp, but it was strong enough to hold up to passing scrutiny. It was a fine, low-level charm. Satisfied with the subterfuge, he moved on. As he stepped away, he activated a similar charm on his wrist to hide himself during his recon. Almost immediately, the hairs on the back of his neck began to quiver. This is more than my aura rippling. There is a static glamour here. Old, almost natural, he realized as he reached out with his higher senses. The subtle field cascaded over him as he took in his surroundings. It was an old magic, a simple magic. Many paths crisscrossed. This was a heavily traversed area. As he crested a small hill, he found it, a hidden village being ripped apart by powered armor-wearing thugs. The village blended almost seamlessly with the surrounding forest. Doors and windows intermingled with tree trunks, vines, rocks, and other recesses of the land. Even without a glamour, one would be hard-pressed to find the domiciles. The denizens of this area were short, red-haired women with Vulpine attributes. Their resolve in combat made up for their smaller stature against their enemy. They fought with their all, like any with their home in jeopardy, though there was only so much they could do against a superior foe. While there were a few men in this tribe with matching characteristics, the men were a clear minority. The residents, in natural fibers and furs, fought the men in black advanced composite powered armor. The aggressors were quick, ruthless in their attacks. Having advanced technology and numbers, the residents were a mere nuisance. They were brutal in their tenacity. Could it be? He asked himself. Yes. Their MO was obvious. Black Bolt mercs. The Black Bolt mercs, or BBM, were well trained and well organized, though they did tend towards zealotism. While referred to as mercs, they were by most accounts a group of tight-knit people that believed in continual improvement. They believed in extreme survival of the fittest, that is to say, they lived to challenge themselves as much as possible and thought nothing of the dead. To die of old age to them was an insult. Death in battle was the pinnacle of the warrior aspect of their group, though those that weren't warriors were still expected to hold their own in a fight, while at the same time pushing the edge of science and technology. There was a time when the Central Empire had employed this over-eager troop, but after too many infractions of the Charter of Civilized Combat, they had not only been dismissed from the Empire's service, they had been banned from the Empire itself. As the Central Empire had a live and let live philosophy, the current whereabouts and doings of the BBM were unknown, at least until now. He spied a lone gunman in the middle of the stream making pop shots at some residents and started towards him. During an active confrontation, His Scout's class Glamour Charm would be of little use, so he augmented the simple charm with a spell of his own as he silently slipped into the village. As he slipped towards his target, he slowly withdrew his wakizashi. With a few steps to go, he cast a spell of charming flame, and the blade was enveloped with a faint yellow-green of his aura. This was more than a simple flaming weapon now. Its flames would now feed on the victim's own aura. A frowned-upon casting, but for BBM, he was willing to make an exception, especially seeing as how he was critically outnumbered. As a merc exited the domicile, Alexi slapped up the barrel of the rifle with his hands, eyes still on his intended target. The trigger was pulled, the gun went off, but in the heat of battle, others failed to notice the report. The merc could not see through his glamour, so it's a quick fight of a few left-handed blows as Alexi shifted his focus before the coup de grace that ended the merc's career. Flames licked the corpse, but the dead produced no aura, and the leftovers were quickly extinguished. He then carefully removed most of the man's equipment. What little he could take and still be combat effective, he took. Even though he knew he couldn't brandish the weapons of men trying to decimate the village wildly, he knew that having a firearm would be critical to the bout. And so, he quickly put on a pistol holster, holstered the pistol and slung the rifle over his back, and moved on. Alexi was highly trained and quite powerful. Confidently, he strode into the battlefield, his glamour shielding him from most enemies' notice, as they were not even looking for him. Undetected, he made his way to his next victim and stomped violently on the back of his knee. Clearly surprised, he nonetheless managed to use the force of the blow to roll and turn and shoot where his attacker should be. Alexi had moved on in anticipation of the retaliation and rushed the merc. As his glamour was low-powered and the merc was hopped up on adrenaline, and obviously better trained than the first, he managed to detect Alexi and the tussle was a bit more intense. Alexi attacked with his blade, but the merc blocked with his rifle, all the while trying to get a bead on the vapor from him. The longer it took to take this man out, the more likely it would be that he would be detected by another. A lucky blow cracked the control crystal of his glamour charm gauntlet on his right hand, and the subterfuge was dropped. Knowing he didn't have the reserves or skill to hold a glamour on his own, unassisted, he let it go and focused his now free mana to barrier spells. Something he was so practiced in, he could hold one almost indefinitely, under the right circumstances at least, to protect against stray bullets. Now able to see his enemy, the merc fought harder, but was soon taken down by Alexi's superior skill. A glancing shot to his side told Alexi another had found him. He turned to see that it was actually two. They popped off a few more shots with their pistols before holstering their guns and drawing blades of their own. It may seem counterintuitive, but blades did have a better chance of getting through barriers. The reason was that they had more mass and traveled slower, giving a psychological boost to piercing that bullets just couldn't have. Drawing the pistol with his left hand, Alexi found the marauders had their own defensive barriers, and his gun was just as useless as was theirs. With smiles, they began double-teaming him with their blades, and newly drawn friction batons. Sometimes a fight is more about wearing one's opponent down as opposed to beating them outright, especially if you had numbers against skill. The trio traded blows, Alexi expertly deflecting and dodging the attacks of the others. As the commotion continued, they attracted the attention of the rest of the brigade. Now that they had a worthy adversary, the villagers were left to their own devices, and thus allowed to regroup. Now, in extremely unbalanced combat, Alexi began to take blows, but he also managed to give more than he received. He managed to get behind one of the attackers and slit his throat, the aura of the victim instantly igniting flames. Now, crazed and in pain, he scurried about the field, igniting in turn anyone who happened upon him until he succumbed. As this was going on, Alexi blocked and sliced and cast most aggressive spells he could without depleting his reserves. He needed to hold the barrier around him to survive. The clash of blade and bludgeon punctuated the lightning, fire, and ice storms from all sides that began to cover the area. Though he hadn't fought past the wall in some time, Alexi did manage to power through and finally snap the neck of the last nearby foe.
Damn, they have been practicing,
he panted.
What the fuck do they want here?
Rather than getting an answer, all he received was a blow to the head. Years of training and strong sense of self-preservation took over. He dropped and rolled, and he drew a handgun and took a few shots where his enemy should have been. He missed. Even stretching out with all his senses, he was unable to detect his aggressor, even as he took another blow to the face, knocking his face into the creep.
That's at least Class 4 clam tech, he realized. Probably has optic spinning array too. This is highly experimental tech.
He struck blindly trying to land a blow, but this must have been a decently trained adversary. Rather than attack specific targets like one was supposed to, he had to resort to less powerful area of effect attacks to even hope to land a blow, while at the same time he had to avoid unseen strikes. He managed a few hits, but he was rapidly declining in energy.
"Outsider!"
called a voice from his right.
"You may have better luck with this!"
A small woman tossed a long stick in his direction, but it was deflected by the unseen. The staff was a long oaken rod, seemingly inlaid with precious metals. At one end were some gemstones that looked like the wood had grown around. Hoping that it was something extremely useful or powerful, he dove after it. As soon as he touched it, a rush of energy, like a static charge, engulfed him.
Oh, old magic artifact, he marveled. I hope it knows that I'm trying to help its people.
The length of the staff allowed him a greater reach, allowing him better chances of hitting the foe, and it also helped to recharge his own depleted mana. Though the rod seemed reluctant to take in his mana and act as a focusing implement it was designed to be, but it did appear to want to take down the threat. Alexi's focus was highly elevated. He was now able to partially discern an outline of his enemy, but he was still getting his ass handed to him. Even in the best of circumstances, a many-on-one fight could be more dangerous than a one-on-one, as one had to be wary of friendly fire. But when your allies were more unknown than your enemy, it was a potential catastrophe. Even as they focused on the invisible threat, there were other members of BBM that continued to cut at the edges. The villagers worked well together, covering each other's rears, and they even managed to retake some ground.
I don't know if you can hear me, or even if you can understand, he called out blindly to the villagers. Combating an optically negative opponent can be aided by a light fog. I don't have the capacity to fend off these attacks and concentrate hard enough to build a mist. If you can do that, it would be extremely helpful.
As the villagers were working in concert, they could share their mystic load of calling forth a light fog. This tactic was a tricky endeavor, as too little coverage and nothing would emerge, and too much the point would be moot. Amazingly, they both understood his request and were able to comply. A cool mist issued forth from the river, and the veil with just enough vapor that an outline of the invisible aggressor was distinguishable. Now that the many Amazons were compromising his cover, the enemy devoted more attention to them, giving an ever so slight edge to Alexi, who was finally able to score some critical blows. With each successful hit, the accumulated damage to the suit allowed more to be seen. Attrition was not kind with the Amazons, though. They were dropping like flies. As fewer villagers were available to maintain the screen, the fog dissipated, and more attention was focused back on Alexi, though the damage to his suit was done. The final moments of the fight were something to behold, but it was too little, too late. With a final coup de grace, the partially visible fighter disarmed Alexi and knocked him to the ground.
You are skilled, Centralian.
The man congratulated him as he removed his helmet and deactivated his suit.
I have no quarrel with you, despite your people's short-sightedness. I have moved beyond that. No Centralian would be out here unless there were some kind of disagreement with your government. I could use a man of your skill.
Alexi was in a pinch. While the man above him was tired, he himself was beaten and would stand little chance of winning. His only choice was to stall and hope another opportunity presented itself. Or perhaps he could convince the other to let him go?
Why would I help you slaughter innocents?
He panted, trying to summon some healing energy. The BBM leader could tell what Alexi was doing, and started siphoning off the healing mana Alexi was trying to use, but only the healing energy. He legitimately had no quarrel, but he would not let the enemy heal before he could be certain a blade in his back was not in the near future.
The carnage was, unfortunately, secondary to my main objective. You see, they have items. We need that they would not share.
He shrugged. Matsukatsu was the BBM's mantra.
Look, we are both adults and human. These people are not. I have a purpose, and you could share in that. But I am not so obtuse as to decree that you are only allies or enemies. But you do know what we do to enemies. I won't let you heal until I know your answer.
Alexi had many spells to supplement healing, and he had been cycling through them too fast for the other to siphon effectively. But now the other was getting weary. He engulfed Alexi in a parasitic aura that would consume any activated aura to make itself stronger. Alexi could no longer risk casting any spell.
That's no ordinary spell.
Alexi grunted as the pressure of his psyche eased.
How are you doing this?
Join me and you can learn. He put a bit more pressure to make his point, knowing the survival instinct was the best way to gain new acolytes for his people. I am certain you will find the ends justify my means. Knowledge, especially about new, different, and previously unknown abilities, could change Alexi's mind about helping this man. He could learn about the other skills, regain his health, and bring them down from within. But what if he lost himself? Desperation was about to make his decision for him. Just as he was about to concede defeat, a flash of red shot from the woods directly at the merc's throat. As the two forms struggled in the water, the creek changed to the color of wine. The pressure on Alexi dispersed completely. He gratefully put forth some concentration to heal and consider the turn. The red form turned out to be a giant werefox, almost as big as he was. The fact that this beast had so easily taken him down showed that the merc had been closer to failing than Alexi thought, although he knew that he could not have taken him down anyway. The struggle was short, and the corpse began to float down the river as the were turned on Alexi.
Oh shit!
He knew he was in no condition to take on a fully raged werefox and berserker.
It's okay, sweetie. I'm not here to hurt you or your family.
He tried to calm down the beast with the goodbye beast trick spells. The spells did not work. In fact, it looked like the beast was getting more pissed. It slowly inched towards him, snarling and hissing. Alexi backed away, slowly, hands out, palms down.
It's okay. I'm leaving. Shit!